page. Right up. The second page of that document is just as important as the first page, because on the second page, we are trying to get more specific with them, in particular about what they want. And in fact, what we've identified is what their goals are for the intervention. And the reason that we're trying to do that is that we used to do the first page, we'd have the interview, we had a family come in, and we were all set up to do a mediation and work out where the kid could go. And the parent said, well, this is a counseling session, and we want to have a conversation about the fact that tomorrow we're going to take Billy Bob and haul him off to Utah and put him into a locked facility. That's not mediation. There was no negotiation going on there. That was a setup. Basically, we were set up to provide something that was on the face of it, a conversation and a discussion and an agreement that would be arrived at by mutual consent. But what we had was a situation in which there was no discussion, and we were just going to talk about how that kid felt about being locked up. Okay. And so when that happened, we came to the realization that because we had done the first part of the questionnaire, but had not done the second part of the questionnaire, we were in a position of doing something we don't want to be doing. Now, it isn't that we don't want to do it, it's that we're not in the business of just locking people up without discussion. That's not who we are. That's not what we do. So as a way of handling that, what we concluded was that instead of getting set up in the future, we're going to set them up, right? And that setup on our part is that we need them to tell us what exactly it is they want to do when they come through the door. We need to know from them what they expect would be a likely outcome or a preferred outcome for them at this point, so that we don't get into a position where we're just doing Band-Aid work on a case where a kid is being locked up and we have nothing to say about it. So it doesn't matter to me which of the parties you interview on this first. Whichever one is convenient is fine. But what's important about this part of the conversation, and it's especially important about this part of the conversation, is that you have this without the other party in the room or in earshot. Because at this stage of the game, you're beginning to talk about things that can trigger the other person into an ongoing conflict. And you can also get the person who you're talking to become angry and not willing to negotiate on anything. So you separate them. You tell them the kid has to go in the other room, not in earshot. Tell the kid, we're not done until we talk to them. We want to know, but we need to talk to you now. We need to get some answers about what you want to do. So we're establishing and trying to identify with them in as an open a process as possible, what it takes, or where we see this going with a kid that is having this level of difficulty. And the first thing you can tell them about the list as it's presented on the sheet is that this list that I have, there are about 4 or 5 possibilities here. And as I describe them to you, as I go down the list, I'm definitely going down the list, okay? Because at the bottom of the list is probably not where you want to be. And at the top of the list is usually where it works out, and it's much easier to do. So I'll cover them all. I want to make sure you know everything that's available. But as you go through this process, you then present to them one by one what these options are, and you try to give them feedback as to what is a realistic expectation with regard to that particular approach. Now, the first one is, do you want to be at home? And most of the time, the parents will say yes, but not always. And that's fine. You can say that the kid does not have to be at home with you. You're not legally obligated to have the child in your own home, but you are legally obligated to find them some shelter and a place to live. you can't abandon them, you can't neglect them. So even if you don't want them at home with you, that's okay. But if you do want them to be at home, even though you've described all these horrible things they're doing, what is it that that would make it work? Let's assume, that we can get, him or her to do what you're asking. Most of the time, what they're asking for is the kid goes to school, gets passing grades, doesn't go running off, and frequently shows at least a modicum of respect for the parent. And those are not unacceptable conditions. That's pretty much normal civil behavior. Sometimes their idea and definition of respect is unreasonable, and sometimes they have another agenda, which is they have a whole different conflict going on, but they're having the kid act as the kind of, the whipping boy, or the focus of attention for that problem, rather than them handling their other issues. In other words, they're blaming somebody else for the problem that they have somewhere else. This is also characteristic of a lot of runaway cases. Both the parents and the kids do what's called externalization. They put the problem on everybody else but themselves. They do not accept that the things that they're doing are either not working or are dysfunctional. And so you have to find a way to diplomatically convey to them that, one, if they keep doing it, they're going to get the same result, and that's probably not what they want. So in the course of this discussion, you're asking them to be more clear. And if they don't want the kid to be at home, there is a plan B, which is they can go and stay with a caregiver. Now, legally, that's entirely feasible if they give consent for that to happen. But there are operating constraints, then we have to tell them what those constraints are when it has to do with caregiver. One of them is that we, on our part, will not negotiate for the kid to go stay with their boyfriend or their girlfriend. That's not on the table. We'll tell the kid that, we'll tell the parents that. It's not an option. What we will tell them is that they can go stay with somebody else, but if they're going to stay with somebody else, that person, that other party, is going to have to be in a position and a role of assuming the responsibility of doing supervision with the kid and handling and making sure that the kid goes to school or whatever. We're not going to negotiate for the kid to go out and go to, party and with no supervision at all. We won't do that. Otherwise, everything else is on the table. And that means that they can go and stay with, Aunt Betty for an hour or two when things get really tough at home, and then they can come home. Or they can go and stay with Aunt Betty overnight if it's really a bad day, and they can come home on the next day. Or they can go and stay with Aunt Betty the entire school week and come home on the weekends. Or they can stay with Aunt Betty all the time. We don't care. That's okay with us, whatever they both can agree to. And the things they have to agree to are, one, that there's some third party that they can accept and agree to as handling that responsibility. And two, what we do think is important is, if that doesn't work, what's going to be plan B? Now, what we also tell them in this process, and we give them different upsides and downsides depending upon which party you're talking to. So for example, when you talk about the caregiver, basically you may have to provide the caregiver with a face-saving rationale as to why it would be better for the kid not to be at home with the parent, because they feel guilty about it, or they just feel angry and they want to engage in reprisal, and they don't care that that they're skating on the edge of abuse, or the kids going to get locked up. They don't care. So what you do is you can present the parent with the idea that if Billy Bob is at Aunt Betty's house and he's going to school and he's getting passing grades, which he isn't getting at home now, then that would be success. That would be better than what's going on now, right? It's hard for them to argue with that. So basically you can provide them with a reason why it would be better for the kid to be elsewhere. And you may need to provide them with that as a way of letting, themselves and the kid off the hook, because you're pretty much fairly certain that this parent is not all there. Now that argument goes the other way when you're talking to the kid. When you're saying, when you talk about the caregiver arrangement with the kid, you have to say, look, it's not going to be your boyfriend. Two, it's not going to be anybody that doesn't supervise you. But in addition to that, it also has to be somebody that's acceptable to your parents too. But here's the thing about this. You can come to an agreement with your parents in a wide range of possibilities that you can and your parents can agree to, so that if you don't feel comfortable staying at Aunt Betty's, you come back home. But everybody's clear as to where you go when you leave there. You don't go to Aunt Betty's and then go wherever. So they'll usually come along on that. The other thing that you can tell them is that when they're in placement with us, basically we will allow them to call their friends or Aunt Betty, and specifically for the purposes of requesting that they act as a caregiver, given that there's a written agreement with them and their parents to do it. And we also coach them on how to do it. We'll tell them, if you're calling your friend Julie and Julie's not too sure and her mom isn't too sure, what you can do is you can say, one, I would only come to your house if I have a written permission from my mom to do it. And two, and in the initial round, I would only stay for a day. And after you've had a series of those interactions with Julie and her mom, and they feel comfortable with you being with them, and you're still not getting along with your mom at home, then you can change this agreement to go for a longer term arrangement. But we don't usually recommend that you just go all in and move in with somebody else and tell them you're going to live with them from then on. That's a little bit much for them to take. So you have to be gradual about this process, and you have to be careful about this process, and you have to be civil. And so if you can do that, then we'll do what we can in the mediation process to make this work for you. So the way that you present each of these options is different depending upon the person with whom you're speaking. When you come to Job Corps, it's pretty much the same.
Hey.
I'm sorry, what's the question?
Rex, you're unmuted, Rex, just to let you know.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
So when we come to the next one, Job Corps, what Graham has discovered is that there is not only Job Corps, but there's another program out on Treasure Island that will place kids. Previously, we were constrained to Job Corps, which has an age range of 16 and up. The Job Corps option is one where the kid cannot be high income, or if they are high income, they have to have ADHD or a learning disability that will allow them to get into Job Corps. That's the exception for high income. Everybody else, they have to be 16, and it's a voluntary program. The parent has to consent to it, the kid has to consent to it, and then you can present to them what the advantages are of being in Job Corps. One is they go to school, they get a high school diploma when they're 18, they can stay in Job Corps until they're 21. They learn skills, employment skills, rather than academic skills, so that when they come out of Job Corps, they can get a job as a chef, or as a person working in the construction trades, or doing office management, or I don't know whether or not they have any other tech skills that they're teaching at this point at Job Corps. But basically, then Job Corps will hook them up with the job itself, right? So they live in a dormitory. They're not locked in. They can come and go as they please within reasonable limits. They can go visit their family on the weekends or whatever. But basically, that's where they are, and they're not with their family anymore. Those are the conditions of Job Corps, and a certain percentage of these cases will take that. The problem that we have with Job Corps right now is that because of COVID, they're not very actively receiving cases, and that may still be the case. In addition to that, what Graham discovered was that there's a life living skills program there, which will take kids down to the age of 14. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right, Tom. Yeah, it's a charter school that does very well with kids. Yeah, they with teaching them trades, and yeah, it's a really good program.
Okay, so the next on the list here is emancipation. And the way in which you present this to the parents is, first of all, ask them not to laugh at you or hang up the phone when you present it, because they're going to think that you're completely out of your mind by talking about this with their kid that's bonkers bouncing off the wall. But just give it a little inoculation before you get into the conversation with a sense of humor about it. But say, look, emancipation is legally possible in California for a kid as young as 14. They can, if they can hold a job for 6 months and have enough in the way of income and enough in the way of resources to live separately from their parents, they can file a petition with the court to be recognized as an adult. Now, also what I need to tell you, kid, is that this is extremely difficult to do. There are people that are 35 years old that can't do this. So you should approach this solution with some degree of caution, even though you're enthusiastic about it. And I'm all for, and I think your parents, and I'm going to try to persuade your parents to at least have the option of getting a job, because there you would have, you wouldn't have to be at home with your parents, and there you would have some money, and there you could potentially, build up enough in the way of 6 months of work experience to file your petition with the court. So that's how that goes. And then when you talk to the parents, you say, what's going to happen? And the parents will often resist this. And you can say, look, if you don't resist this, you have to think about what's going to happen. The kid is going to go try to get a job, and it's not going to be easy. And if they're lucky enough to get a job, then they have to deal with their employer, and their employer isn't going to like it if they don't show up for work or they don't do the work. So then they have yet another round of authority that they have to manage and deal with, which isn't you. So you don't have to do that anymore. Then it turns over to be their employer's problem, not yours. So at that stage of the game, your kid is going to learn that you're not the only person in the world setting limits. And that might be helpful for them, even if they don't succeed in their goal of becoming emancipated. Not to mention the fact that most jobs they get are not going to be paying them enough to pay rent and transportation and food, etc. And they'll probably figure that out as they go along. And most of the parents realize, yeah, that's okay, because then I don't have to do those things. And if he does become emancipated, I'm no longer legally liable. So I'm off the hook. So, good luck, kid. We're not getting in your way of doing that. And just let the kid play it out. And almost all the time, both kid knows and the parents know that that's a nice idea, and it's a potential opening for them to actually learn some work, but it isn't likely to be a successful outcome. But it doesn't really matter all that much, because in order to be emancipated, go to the path of emancipation, they have to live somewhere anyway, which means they're either going to be living with their parent or with their caregiver or whatever. And that usually that's where it comes back to. It comes back to the parent or the caregiver, and that ends up being the final solution. But the emancipation option is an option which gives the kid enough leeway to go off and not bother their parents that much, or be away from their parents. The next on the list is institutional placement. That's the bottom of the list. That's what we're trying to avoid if we can do it. But we will not avoid it if it's pretty clear to us that there's no room on the part of to move here. This parent is unquestionably abusive and negligent, and we're going to file a suspected child abuse report, and we're going to let CPS handle the case, because this parent is not doing anything to help this kid. In fact, they're pretty much hurting the kid, all the way through. With the parent, what you can tell them is, if this kid goes to juvenile hall, or if they go to the Child Protective Services, or even maybe even with psych emergency, you're going to have to foot part of the bill on that. And that by itself is often enough to convert them. At that point, they realize, oh, well, I'm going to have to pay. Then they start getting real about the other options. The kid sometimes doesn't care. And I don't care if I go to CPS or juvenile hall, you can say, look, you might not care now, but you probably will care once you get in there. Because most of the time, or not most of the time, all of the time, you're not going to be the one making the decision as to whether or not you stay there. The person who's going to be making that decision isn't going to be you. It's not going to be your parents. It's going to be a judge. And they might be able to talk to you about every 3 months to figure out maybe they might do something. So if you want that option, that's what you could get stuck with. And you might not like, the company that you have when you go to that choice. So and we, by the way, we do that. We don't recommend it. No, we're not trying to encourage you to get into foster care. We're simply trying to tell you that this is a serious choice and you better have a serious reason for doing it. With the parents, it's basically, your options as a parent will no longer be yours and you will pay. Between those two arguments, usually both sides will back away from that as a solution. And they will tend to start looking at the other options much more seriously. Now, once you get them to agree that they will accept or not accept any of these options, you put a little check in the box, okay? It's a possibility, they will accept it. They might go for the caregiver. You can check the box, even if they don't know who it is. You can just put a question mark as to who it would be. That's okay. All we're asking and all we're trying to get at this point, at this stage of the game, is whether or not they're willing to go in that direction and have that discussion and accept that as a possible outcome. Now, after we have completed the check in the box, then we do one more thing with them. We say, which of them do you want the most? So this is a process of not only getting them to focus on what the outcomes and the choices are, but also getting them to commit to one of those choices as their first priority. All right. And then you can say, I want you to rank them. I want you to tell me which one's number one, which one's number two, et cetera, et cetera. And so when you get through with your conversation with the parent or the kid, you have a fairly clear idea as to what their goals are and what their priorities are. And that's what the social worker who is doing the mediation needs to have going in. Because when they go into the mediation, they will know at that point, this kid has, agreed that he can stay with, Uncle, Carlos, and the parents said so too. They just said so independently of each other. They're in agreement. The other thing that you do when you finish this and conclude this process of getting them to agree is you tell them, don't have a conversation with the other party and start negotiating with them now. Don't do it. And the reason they'll say, why is that? And you can say, because you haven't been able to get along too well on a lot of other things. And you know what? That other party, your parent or your kid, is just going to say no because they're all pissed off at you. And that means that this item that you think is a good idea, even if you think it's a great idea, the more you think it's a great idea, the more likely it is they're going to tell you no, even though they'll tell us yes in a private conversation. So don't go there. Don't even have that discussion with your parent or your kid. Wait for us to get into the process with you in the mediation so that option, which you think is a good idea, could actually be something the kid could bring up and it might work. So that's the aim of the mediation, is to come to a point where they can both agree about one or two of these options. And then that's the primary, that becomes in the mediation agreement, the primary location. But we also say, if that doesn't work, then we need to know what's going to be the second choice. And sometimes we'll even go to 3 levels of this, and if they have a really bad one at the bottom, it gives them motivation to make the one at the top work. So in addition to getting them to give you an idea and a commitment as to what they would like in terms of the goals, you also want to try to persuade them to participate in the process of getting additional aftercare services. And it's not usually very hard to do. I mean, if the kid has been in psych emergency or has depression or has been very, very angry and uncontrolled, the parent shouldn't be very difficult to persuade to get what is necessary, not just counseling, but a full psychiatric assessment. And that means 2 or 3 sessions with a psychiatrist, and you tell them a psychiatrist, not a psychologist, because a psychiatrist can prescribe medication and a psychologist can't always do that. So basically, go for the psychiatrist, get the assessment, and be very clear that that assessment is not the same as counseling. You need both. So when you call, the mental health access line, and we have that number on the chart, that, the flow chart, then basically you can give them that number right then and there and say, be prepared when you call the mental health access line that, you can have a cup of coffee and make sure you don't have anything else to do, because that'll take them 20 minutes to answer the phone. And when they do, then you're going to have to go back and forth with them about not only getting a psychiatric assessment, but you also want counseling. And we highly recommend family therapy. And we don't say that the kid shouldn't get individual therapy, particularly if there's been a case where the kid has been traumatized, abused, raped, or has PTSD, etc., because they need individual therapy too. But most of the fire, most of the smoke, most of the conflict is between you and the kid, which is why you need to do family therapy. And what I give them is this metaphor of the football team. A football, team doesn't just go out and do calisthenics and then play football. What they do is they do calisthenics, but they also throw the ball back and forth so that they know what their plays are and how things work as a team. If you had a football team that only did calisthenics, they'd lose. So this is a team approach, and you got a team here, and we recommend that you do the family therapy approach in addition, if necessary, do the individual approach too. So those are the particulars of that process. Now,